sometimes we get 2 people to come out, and so this is fantastic. So thank you so much for doing that. My name is Derek Brown, and I've been passing out a little sheet, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. I am running, in terms of my background, I am running first and foremost because I am a conservative. I believe strongly in conservative principles because they work. In the past, I ran as a conservative, and I actually won an election as a conservative. One of the things that, for me, was kind of a formative experience was I ran against an incumbent Democrat in my area of Salt Lake County, and I was successful in beating the Democrat. And to this day, that area is still Republican. And so I won that election, I won a re-election, and interestingly, one of the reasons that I think my candidacy was strong enough that I could beat an incumbent Democrat, incidentally, 2 years before that, he had beat the sitting Speaker of the House. And so he was a strong candidate. One of the reasons that I was able to be the candidate was because I had 100 new friends that I had gotten to know during the course of that process. And those were my county delegates. And those were the ones who I had worked with. And frankly, they had, as delegates do, they grilled me with questions. They wanted to know who I am, where I stood for, those sort of things. And when it came time to having a general election, they were my biggest supporters. They were the ones who were willing to do the stuff that isn't really glamorous when it comes to elections, putting up signs, the cottage meetings, introducing people to their friends. And so anyway, I'm a strong believer in that caucus system that we have, particularly because of that. That's one thing that no one really talks about, and it is that the caucus system makes our candidates stronger. That's what enabled me to win that race. So I served in the House of Representatives until my good friend and former law partner, Mike Lee, called me up and asked me if I would leave my position there and help him as his state director. So I spent the next several years working in that role, working with Senator Lee. And I did that because I believed in his conservative reform agenda. He was someone whose agenda and whose vision matched mine in terms of where he wanted to go. One of the reasons I am running is because as a party here in Utah, we have always been able to win elections as Republicans, basically by showing up, right? Our sheer numbers have enabled us to win elections time and time again. And those days are quickly coming to a close. And if you're watching kind of what's happened, it's interesting. Utah, maybe 12 or 13 years ago, was surrounded by states that were all Republican. And you've watched that change bit by bit, haven't you? Nevada's state party, their state Republican party, is in absolute shambles. They've been fighting each other for the last 5 or 6 years. And if you watch what's happened, it's now a blue state. Republicans don't hold statewide office there. Arizona is turning purple. New Mexico is a blue state. And Colorado, right? Colorado went from red to blue virtually overnight because of out-of-state money that was coming in, driving voter turnout on things like voter initiatives. Now, does that sound familiar? That's exactly what happened here just this last election when we lost a seat in the House of Representatives here, Weber County, right? We lost 2 other seats, one of them in Draper, Utah, which is about as conservative an area as you're going to get. We lost almost every county-wide seat we could lose in Salt Lake County, and we lost a seat in Congress, didn't we, by 692 votes. So one of the reasons I am running is because as a party, we need to be organized. I've talked with a lot of delegates, and everyone says one version of this theme, and that is, it's time for us as a party to be unified, to work together, and to figure out what we can do, even though we may have disagreements over really important constitutional issues. And I believe those are very important. Is that a 1 minute? Okay, ironically, years ago, I used to work with the attorney who wrote the party's brief to the Supreme Court in terms of the issues, and so I'm disappointed the court didn't take those issues up. But notwithstanding, as a party, we can be united, we can have important, robust debates, and we can also win elections. And so I am running primarily on my platform, which is uniting the party, bringing us together behind sort of an agenda that resonates, and not just with voters here, but young voters, because you'll notice most of the young voters are not trending to the right, are they? They're trending to the left, and I believe we can do that. And so that is why I'm running to be chair of the Utah Republican Party. And again, my name is Derek Brown. So thank you for your time.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I also want to thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Chadwick Fairbanks, and I'm a small business owner and a military veteran. And about a year ago, I founded the Utah Republican Veterans Caucus and was elected its chairman shortly thereafter, which also gave me the distinguished privilege of serving on the State Executive Committee and the State Central Committee. Now, maybe some of you have seen me at last year's convention. I ran against Congressman Rob Bishop for CE1. I think that competition is very healthy inside a party. As Republicans, as conservatives, we believe in a free marketplace of ideas and products, and I think when we have a healthy debate, when we have healthy dissent, the best product, the best idea will come to the fore and win. And so for the last year that I've been involved with the Executive Committee and the Central Committee, I've noticed a little bit of infighting in the party. It seems like we've forgotten who we are as Republicans in Utah. We've forgotten what we stand for, and we've lost the way that we need to go as a party. Now, Derek's completely right about the demographics. Salt Lake City is growing rapidly. The whole state of Utah is growing rapidly. About 60,000 people a year are moving here because of our fantastic economy that is running at high speed because we govern with conservative principles here in Utah. With that being said, though, it's a lot of young people, a lot of tech sector people, and a lot of liberals and progressives that are moving here. So just like California and Nevada and Colorado, if the party gets weakened enough, the state will flip blue. And Utah's not immune to that, and neither is Texas. Texas is turning purple right now, too. So we're at a super crucial stage in inter-party politics here as we go into the 2020 election year. Now, the reason I'm running for chair is because I also see a need to unite the party around the platform. Now, the party is very clearly divided into two factions. It's no surprise, it's no secret, but it's been very hard to get people to dialogue about it. And I think that's because there's not a culture of trust or safety. So before we can have unity, there has to be trust. And the next state party chair has to make it an environment safe to have dissent and debate, to have clear ground rules, and most importantly, to have compromise. So one of the things that I'm going to do as your state party chair right away will be to convene an advisory committee. I have that authority to create a committee. They don't have voting rights, but they can make recommendations. And I will be bringing in all the stakeholders from the various factions in the party into a room so we can hammer out all of the fights in the party, mainly the SB 54 caucus convention fight, which is super, super crucial, it's super important. But we as a party need to come together so we can sustain ourselves going forward and win elections. Our donations have ground to a near halt. We have lots of in-party fighting. We've lost a congressional district race. As Derek mentioned, that was District 4. And our current chairman was censured by the governing body. So we're definitely not doing it right, and we need to start writing the party. And that's one of the governor's hashtags. The governor had a 5-point plan last summer to write the party, and I intend to put that into action right away once I get elected, because there won't be a lot of time to get ready for the 2020 election of the gubernatorial races and the CD races that we need to take back if we're not united right away. That's it, thank you.
So my name is Phill Wright. I'm running for chair of the Utah Republican Party. I know we're running late, so I'm going to try to do this quick. My background, I had the opportunity to serve as the vice chair of the Utah Republican Party. I've been a county chair and a county vice chair. I was a county ethics committee chair. I also had the opportunity in 2016 to be elected as a national delegate representing the state of Utah to the RNC convention. And then that group of 40 national delegates elected me to be the chair of our national delegation to the RNC convention. I tell you this because I think it's important when we're electing a leader for our party that we elect somebody who has experience in the party. We cannot afford to go backwards. We have to go forward. I do have experience. Some of the questions we talked about tonight were how do you unite people? How do you bring people together? I know how to unite people. I know how to bring people together.
When we promote the platform, we bring people in. When they discover, hey, that's how I believe. I have the same beliefs and values that you do. And something else incredible happens. We start cultivating great candidates who also support our platform. And if we have great candidates that support our platform, we've energized the base who want to get out and vote for those candidates. So, if I'm elected chair, my number one priority will be to promote our platform. And by doing that, we can also get good candidates and help them get elected. Another thing that I want to do as chair is fundraising. We know that our party has struggled with that for years because we've been so dependent on big donors to give us money. There's one problem with big donors. It's called strings, and they're attached. The best way to fund any organization is not from the top down, it's from the ground up. It's grassroots. I had the opportunity in 2016 to be, I got a phone call from Ted Cruz. He asked me if I would be the chair of his Utah campaign for president. I was honored to do that. I think the world of the man. I was able to put together a team where we went through the entire state of Utah and met with hundreds of thousands of Utahns, and he received 70% of the vote. The highest percentage of vote he received in any state in all 50 states. That's called grassroots, working from the grassroots, uniting people and bringing people together. When I was at the national convention, I was there with two roles. I was still the chair for the Ted Cruz presidential campaign in Utah. He was still on the ballot, and I was there representing Utah as the chair of our national delegation. So when Donald Trump received the nomination, I had news media from all over the country and actually different parts of the world all shoving their microphone in my face, and they said, "Now what are you going to do?" And I said, "America deserves better than Hillary. I'm going to go home and campaign for Donald Trump." And I did. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad he was elected our president. I'm glad to stand here today and say Hillary Clinton is still not our president. And we should be excited as Republicans about that. So when we talk about unity, I can work with all of the animals in the farm, okay? Or the zoo, as some people might call it. It doesn't matter as long as we focus on the same goal. Sometimes we get too caught up in the weeds, the path to take to get to that goal. But if we remember as Republicans, regardless of the silly labels we throw on one another, if we can focus on the goal, we can get past all the arguments and discussions on how to get to that goal. The path we take is not what's important. What's important is how we get there. And that's what unites us as Republicans, focusing on the things that we have in common. Part of my responsibility when I was helping the state with our lawsuit, there was a big concern about it bankrupting the party. I helped find the $400,000 that paid off all of our legal debt. I also was able to help find the $250,000 that was needed to take our case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It cost the party nothing. During that process, I was able to work with organizations and political parties of every spectrum throughout the country. And we were able to bring people together with very differing ideas. Of course, we had Mike Lee and Rob Bishop write an amicus brief supporting our right, our First Amendment rights of association. I also met with a lady named Violet Rose, who's the national chair of the Green Party. Now, if you know anything about the Green Party, they're very, very different than the Republican Party. I was a little nervous when I met with Violet Rose because I was concerned, because I'm a conservative Republican, that she wouldn't want to talk with me. But here's what we did. We found out what we had in common. It's something that all of us Americans have in common. It's called our U.S. Constitution and our Republican form of government that protects the rights of the individual. She understood that. And every time we spoke, she called me brother. That meant a lot to me. I was also able to meet in Texas with the chairman of the U.S. Pastor Council. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This man's a Baptist. I was actually raised Baptist in Georgia, but I was able to sit down with this man with two very different religious backgrounds, but he understood how important it is that we focus on those things we have in common. I was also able to talk with many national organizations around the country. We had over 8 organizations, political parties in all 50 states support what we were doing. So, do I know how to bring people together? Can I work with people of differing opinions? Absolutely. I've done it over and over for years. The responsibility of the chair is not to dictate to the party. The responsibility of the chair is not to tell everybody what to do. It's to facilitate conversation so everybody's ideas and opinions can be represented. That's what I will do as the chair of the party. Thank you so much.
Is winning an election more important than supporting the platform?
Oh, great. They're both very important. The platform is critical. It is absolutely critical that as delegates, we find candidates who support the platform, because that's ultimately what we're about. That's how you know someone shares our values. But if we find a candidate who is a fantastic candidate, and as a party we don't have the organizational structure or the funding or the wherewithal to get that candidate elected, then all of that has been sort of an exercise. It's sort of been for naught, because we've spent the time and energy getting that person, choosing who's going to be in the race, and then dropping them, like not getting them across the finish line. And so they're both equally important steps in what we do. And so my answer to that is we've got to view them as a complete picture, and it's the job of the chair to ensure that the party structure is funded and organized in such a way that when the delegates do their job, which is absolutely critical, choosing those people who do believe in and are part of our platform, that we have the wherewithal to get them across the finish line. So that's my answer.
While both of those are important, there still needs to be an order of operations, right? There needs to be a sequence. A becomes before B, B comes before C. I would argue that the platform is more important than the actual election, because it's moot to just elect a Democrat that's wearing an R to represent the Republican platform if they're not going to abide by the platform or legislate or execute from a conservative standpoint. So it is the job of the state party chair to recruit and vet candidates, to raise money for those candidates so that they can win, but we want to make sure the right people are running in the right districts and the right races so that we can win. We have the right man for the job. If some of you were at the special election last year for vice chair, I also ran in the vice chair election where Kara won. I mentioned that the R belongs to the Republican Party. You guys are the Republican Party, right? Our elected representatives, they wear that R on loan from us. Every time they get elected, we continue to give them another short-term use of that letter R by their name, but they're a Republican because we elect them to be so first. So they need to understand that their allegiance needs to be to the party and the platform first in order to maintain the use of that R.
If you support the platform, you win elections. It's that simple. And here's why. Because if we have candidates that don't support the platform, they have a hard time getting elected. So they go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other.
What do you see as the most important role of the chair?
Promote the platform, which helps candidates get elected. And bring people together. Work within the Zoom.
The most important role of the chair is organizing the party and making sure it is funded in such a way that it has the ability, as I mentioned earlier, to get those candidates that you have selected across the finish line. From my standpoint, the chair sets a vision and also sets a tone. And because as the chair moves forward, there needs to be confidence that the organization has the ability to do that. If there is no confidence in that, it will be really hard to raise funds. And you've seen the last couple of years, it's been really hard to raise funds. And fundraising is an interesting thing. I've seen this with a lot of candidates. Sometimes you have candidates that complain because they can't seem to raise money, ever. And you have those who raise money simply by going to their mailbox and getting checks. And the question is, what's the difference? And the difference, I believe, is it's not money makes or breaks the election, but sometimes money follows those candidates that people have confidence in and think they can win. It's the same thing with the party. If people feel as a party we are doing our job, we have the ability to get the candidates across the finish line, those resources will be available. And so the job of the party is to ensure that after the delegates have done what is truly the most critical job, which is finding candidates that adhere to the platform, the job of the party chair and the organization itself is to make sure those candidates then can move across the finish line. Because it doesn't do us any good to spend all this time finding the right candidates if we can't get them in office and have them preserve the conservative principles that we believe in government. So that's my answer.
The state party chair is similar to a CEO of a corporation. The chair is the figurehead of the party. The actual governing body is the state central committee. They have the real power to actually do the work of the party and make the decisions. The chair is just supposed to mediate those meetings. But the chair does serve an important role, like a CEO of a corporation does, in setting the vision statement, in setting the mission statement, and then making sure that is adhered by all of the rungs underneath in the hierarchy. The chair also is a liaison with the Lieutenant Governor's office for elections, and is also the face of the party for making statements. But it's really the grassroots and the volunteers of the party that do all the heavy lifting, that do all the hard work. It's the chair's job to make sure that all of that coordination is being properly conducted at the lowest level. And as a leader in that position, it's super important to be proactive and to head problems off at the pass. That's probably one of the most important functions of the chair, whether it's a fundraising problem, a candidate problem, an organizational problem. The chair has to be fluid and dynamic enough to see a problem developing and then immediately take action, utilizing whoever, the county party chairs, precinct chairs, all the resources at his or her disposal to make sure that whatever potential problem it is brewing and bubbling, that it doesn't take the whole party down to this level that we're at right now.
Do you agree with Rob Anderson's position on SB 54?
No.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what his position is, but let me tell you where I stand. And that's a great question, because that's one of the issues that really has been critical. I believe, as a Republican here in Utah, that SB 54 has, the debate over it, it all sort of bubbles down to one issue. And that is, do we believe that the caucus system that we have, the convention process, is the best way of selecting good candidates? Is that the way that we need to move forward? And ultimately, my question, in fact, I think the best question here really is what is it that we can do to make that process stronger? I mean, I've seen it. As a candidate, that's what I did, is I worked with my delegates. They worked with me. And, I mean, it's a great process. One of the benefits of it is you can't hide, right? You can't hide when you're working with delegates, when you have a caucus system, because I had 100 people who knew my number, and they wanted to meet me at McDonald's for breakfast, or they wanted me to come to their home, and I did that, and I spent time working with them. And that made me as a candidate stronger, and it made them part of my team. And so my belief is that what we should do, the real focus we should have as a party, is on the question, how can we make the process, the caucus process, stronger? How can we make it the preferred path so that candidates don't look at it as something they need to avoid, but rather an asset that makes them a stronger candidate? And so one of the things that I would do as chair is really focus on what is it we can do as a party to make it so that the caucus evening, the caucus experience, is something people want to go to. I've talked to, I can't tell you how many delegates in the last few weeks, and I hear complaint after complaint about individual problems in different caucuses. And some, like my caucus night for my precinct went phenomenally well. Very smooth. It was like 45 minutes. It was run extremely well. Not everyone has that same experience. So I believe that the organization of the party with technology, mobilizing and mobilizing resources that we should have as a party, we can make it strong, And we can do it in a way that makes candidates look at it and say, this is a great process. I want to go through this, as opposed to, how do I get around this? And so that's my focus, is how do we provide, we're Republicans. Like, we know that it's not about how do we punish someone or force them to do something. We understand the power of incentives and proper incentives, and that's what I think we need to do, is look at how do we incentivize candidates to do that. And by doing that, it will make the caucus system much stronger and robust. And in some ways, we won't need to have the discussion that we've been having over SB 54 because it will be a strong, robust process. So that's what I think we need to do moving forward.
I'm not quite sure what Rob's position on SB 54 is either, but so I will just elaborate on my take on SB 54. The fight over SB 54 has definitely brought the party to where it's at now. So the fighting about it has to stop. I don't think it was a good law. I prefer the convention caucus system. In fact, Congressman Bishop and I were the only statewide candidates last year to do convention only, because we don't think there's any other way that we should be seeking nomination. The founders, the caucus convention system is similar to the Electoral College, right? I have incredible faith in the founders' vision and format of how they set up the republic. All right, there's a reason why U.S. senators weren't directly elected under the initial founding of the country. There was a reason why the president wasn't directly elected, because direct democracy is too easy to hijack. And the caucus convention system is similar to that of the Electoral College. And I don't want to get rid of it, and I don't think SB 54 is a good law. However, as the state party chair, it is the law. Okay, the fight now, if you don't like the law, it's time for you to call your elected representative as a concerned citizen and ask your legislators to change the law you don't like. As far as the party fighting over it, I think the Supreme Court has pretty much settled that for us, and starting May 5th, it's not going to be an agenda item that I would entertain. Again, this goes back to my advisory council and being proactive as chair to be back channeling with all of the stakeholders. This is not a party fight anymore, like any other bad law. You got to talk to your legislator and get it repealed. But in terms of the intent and spirit of the law, I don't think it was written well. I don't think it's the best system. I think the caucus convention system is the best. And as some of you might be aware, there's only a few states left that have caucus convention systems. I think it's 8. And they're all under attack as well. And there's a lot of people that want to get rid of the Electoral College as well. And I say, you call me a throwback, but I think we should hold on to some of these remnants of the checks and balances of the Republic to include the caucus convention system. Thank you.
One of you two mentioned the 5-point plan to right the party that the governor has. Can you, between the two of you, explain what that is?
All right, I'll give Derek a break here. I'll go first. So the 5-point plan was brought up. It was at the July Executive Committee meeting last year, which was actually my first executive committee, or my first meeting as an executive committee member. And it was actually a plan that our RNC committee member, Thomas Wright, Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes, and of course the Governor Gary Herbert had put together and brought to the party, to Chairman Rob Anderson and the executive committee. And it was just a quick 5-bullet, hey, how do we navigate where we're at, in the middle of the SB 54 fight. And essentially the first point was, hey, look, it's healthy to have debate. Reagan's 11th commandment, it's healthy to have debate, but we're all Republicans, even if we're 70 or 80% on the same page, we agree mostly on all the same things, so we need to not bash each other publicly. That was probably the biggest overall overarching point, was just to be kind to each other publicly, as we're all Republicans. The other points were a little bit more dialed in minutia, like if we have problems with our parliamentarian at our SCC meetings, maybe we should think about getting a new one. We're a full-time party, we should have a full-time executive director. I wholeheartedly agree with that. The problem is we haven't had the funding to cover the expenses of a full-time executive director. Third point was, our fourth point was we should have a full-time lawyer, have full-time legal counsel. And the last point was to let the SB 54 fight run its course, since we had all the legal bills already paid. So those were the 5 points to right the party. It was basically, we need to just bury the hatchet, let bygones be bygones, come back together, and start being Republicans again. And that didn't quite happen.
I think you summarized that great, so unless you want to hear anything from me, let's go to the next one.
I do not know because I'm not a member of the State Executive Committee and I was not in that meeting. I've only heard him talk briefly about it, so I really don't have enough information to recap the governor's 5-point plan to right the party.
How well will you work with either male or female vice chair? What do you think about women in politics, leadership positions, and you're on?
Great, thank you. I think that as a party, we need to do a much better job of reaching out to women, specifically in terms of what it is we can do to get them involved. About 5 years ago, I had a very good friend of mine that I was talking with, and I said, you know, you'd be great in the House of Representatives. And she said, are you sure? Yeah, I don't know if I have time. My kids aren't quite raised, and she hummed and hawed, and I kept saying, no, you know what, we need people like you. She was a good conservative, and, at the night before filing, I said, I called her one more time, and it was one of those pivotal conversations, and afterwards she said, you know what, fine, I'm gonna do this. And so she ran and she won. She's a member of the House of Representatives in Salt Lake County. Kim Coleman is her name. I don't know how many of you know Kim. You love Kim? I love Kim too. I was her first, I wrote her first check. I was like, we need like 50 more of you in the House. And you know what she said to me, and this is interesting, and those of you who are women are gonna know more about this than I do, but she said to me, a couple weeks ago we were chatting, and I said, why is it we don't have more women in politics? And her response is, she goes, Derek, you know what's interesting? Men just kind of up and do these things. Women need to be asked. And she said studies after study after studies have shown that. And so I think as a party, we need to really look at how it is that we can reach out and affirmatively ask and help women become more involved in the party. Because a lot of times when as a party, or even as a legislature, we make decisions that aren't as wise as they could be, often my wife afterwards will look at me with a twinkle in her eye and say, no women were consulted in the making of that law, were they? And in fact, 9 times out of 10, she may be right. And so anyway, I believe that it's a vital role, and not just in the legislature and in elected positions, but we've had phenomenally bright and successful women like Lisa who've been serving in party leadership and know how to organize and can be strong in the face of difficult situations. And so I think that's something that if I am chair, I will make that a priority, just as I have before being a chair. And so that's my approach to that.
So I believe you guys have, in Davis County, you guys have a freshman Congresswoman, was it Melissa Ballard this year, or just got elected in 2018, and she's a stay-at-home mom / like piano teacher. I think that's fantastic. I think we need more grassroots women involved in politics, just across the board. Women typically tend to be the CEO of the household, and they're managing and multitasking like crazy. And the marketers have been marketing to the women for a long time. They realize that the balance of power with the checkbook and the purchasing power, going back, I think about 10 years now, it's mostly women now that have a lot of purchasing power or authority over the pocketbook. So in the marketplace, the marketers have been going after the women's vote for a long time, and we inside politics need to do a better job of courting the female voters and courting the female candidates. In terms of working with any female members of the executive leadership team, that won't be an issue. I know we're in a very hostile culture war environment with #MeToo stuff and toxic masculinity and all these things that are coming out from the APA. And there's a real assault on just family values and just gender roles, and there's all the gender euphoria and dysphoria. There's a lot of things out there regarding the attack on family, men and women, and gender issues. But be assured that I will have no problem working with any female members of our staff, and I would welcome more female politicians in the Republican Party.
Thank you.
I don't care if you wear a dress, I don't care if you wear a kimono, it doesn't matter to me. I care about what's up here, not what you're wearing.
What is your position on the call for the Convention of States?
It's a good question. Now, as a chair, my role is not to be a legislator, but to affect, and Chadwick was talking about this, the will of the body. And so that's not a position. I mean, I certainly have a position, you know, as a former legislator, but I'm not running for a legislative position. This is a chair position. And so my job as chair would be to take the position that is decided upon by the body, by the central governing committee of the Republican Party, and then enact those policies. And so that applies to any of a number of policies. I mean, whether we're talking about sort of where we are in caucuses, where we're talking about any of the policy decisions that generally come in front of the body, or that are involved with the legislature, those are things that the policy body can work on in terms of platforms, in terms of sort of structuring where we go from a policy standpoint. The job of the chair is to organize and to move forward with that. So that's my answer on that, because I don't want to get into those sort of policy details, simply because that's the role of the chair, is to facilitate the decisions made. In fact, it was funny, I was having a conversation with an elected official about a policy issue, and he said to me, "Derek, remember, you're running to be chair, you're not running to be legislator. You already did that." And so that's something that I need to keep in mind, because I love talking policy, but as chair, it's a different role.
So Derek's right. The role of the chair is to be a neutral executive. So the four state party officers, the chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, have to take a pledge of neutrality to basically run the party. And it's up to the governing body, essentially, to do all the debating and fighting about candidates and all the policy stuff. And the Utah Republican Party is also just one facet of the larger Republican Party at the national level. So any marching orders and things we get down from our RNC chairwoman, right, either through her or through our committee man, Thomas Wright, there's an overarching national Republican agenda that we have to do our part of as the Utah Republican Party. For instance, if Donald Trump becomes the presidential nominee next year for 2020, you know, the RNC will give every state its little list of tasks, and that'll be up to the chair to execute and carry out. Now, as a citizen, as a civilian now, but as an ex-military veteran, you know, of course I have an opinion on a convention of states. I think it's a bad idea. I used to think it was a good idea when I was younger. You know, it will force term limits on, you know, the federal Congress, and will force them to be able to do all these things if we can amend the Constitution. I actually think at this juncture in our national politics, I don't think a convention of states would go very well. DC doesn't follow the Constitution and half of the federal statutes that are on the books already. Convening a convention to amend the Constitution isn't going to change that. It's just going to create a bigger opportunity for, I think, very bad. I think there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences if we convene a convention of the states. I think until the state houses can rein in DC to follow the original charter, which would be the Constitution and the original 10 amendments, I don't think we should even be entertaining an idea of a convention of states. But as a state party chair, you know, we will do what we have to as the RNC needs from us. So thank you.
The signature path destroys the purpose of the caucus convention system when money and influence can buy an office. Explain how the party can ensure party platform candidates can win.
I think the fundamental job of a delegate is to work with candidates one-on-one. And this is something that I certainly appreciated, because there's no sort of getting around the one-on-one conversations with candidates. And so ultimately, I think what we can do as a party is to ensure that in terms of the write-ins and that kind of thing, I think what we need to do is fundamentally sort of rethink how it is that we make the caucus system strong. As I mentioned before, there have been a lot of suggestions about punishing those who don't go through it and that sort of thing. And with the law where it is now, and I've also had a lot of people asking, where do you think, you know, the law itself, do you think the Supreme Court should have taken it? Funny enough, the individual that as a party we hired to write the Supreme Court brief, about 16 years ago, he had 2 young associates at the law firm who were doing his motions and research. It was myself and Mike Lee. So we worked with him years ago. He's about as good as they come. And he made a very compelling case for why it is the Supreme Court should take it, why it is SB 54 violates the Jones principle, it violates Lopez Torres, it violates other precedent that the Supreme Court has established. But the fundamental sort of bottom line here is that they chose not to take it. So what we need to do as a party is to, rather than look backwards and sort of rehash what happened back there, let's look forward and say, all right, the caucus system creates strong candidates. It's that representative government where we get together in smaller groups and we can really talk to someone and get to know them. There's no hiding. You know what I'm saying? When you're even in a small group like this, you know what I'm saying? If I'm hiding something or whatever, like you know what I'm saying? You know what someone's like after you've watched them and listened to them. And that's the benefit of that system. And so my belief is that we can continue to make it stronger. And there are many things that we can do to sort of modernize the process, incentivize people to want to go through, particularly candidates. We want candidates to understand that this is the preferred path. This is what makes a candidate strong. So that's my, fundamentally, I think this is similar to another question that was asked, but that's my belief, is that we can use the power of incentives to create a strong process.
Well, it can. I mean, let's be frank. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. You know, I'm not always going to tell you what you want to hear, but I am going to tell you the truth. And SB 54 does weaken the caucus process. It does allow a candidate to potentially circumvent the convention system. And it's just a matter of perspective. Those who are in favor of SB 54 say it offers more options for a candidate to get the nomination, so it offers more of a plurality of choices for the voters. And then they'll cite examples of candidates that lost at convention and then won the primary as a perfect, case in point. The people that are against SB 54 will take that same case in point and argue, well, the convention system fired that candidate or incumbent. It's typically an incumbent, but because there was SB 54, the will of the party was able to be usurped, and then that person that was fired at convention still got to be the nominee. Again, I would go back to the perfect corollary here is the attack on the Electoral College. Right? All the Democrats are, complaining that Hillary Clinton had more of the popular vote. She should have beat Donald Trump. We need to get rid of the Electoral College and go to a direct vote. Right? That's similar to what SB 54 does. It doesn't completely get rid of our convention system, but it allows for more of a direct vote. So to whoever asked that question, I can't ensure that as a state party chairman. Like if a candidate doesn't want to uphold the platform and they've got $10 million and they want to just buy all the signatures and then just paper the airwaves and just get the lowest common denominator voter to put them in at the primary election, there's nothing we can do to stop that right now. What we can do to stop that is to quit fighting about it in the party. And if all of the SB 54 haters are so up in arms about it, you need to get a hold of your elected representative. It's a law. Talk to your legislator. Put pressure on them the old-fashioned way, the grassroots style, and get them to repeal the law. As far as the party fighting over it, it needs to stop May 5th.
This is a great question. When Mitt Romney announced that he was going to run for the Senate, our current chair did an interview in the newspaper, and he attacked Mitt Romney. He called him a carpetbagger, a rhino. He used all of the names that someone here has mentioned. I was very, very offended by that. Not necessarily because I'm a strong supporter of Mitt Romney. I know him personally. I think he's a good man. I voted for him twice when he ran for president. I received a phone call the next day from Mitt Romney, and I said, Governor, Governor, I'm not the leader of the party, but as a Republican, I apologize to you for the way you were treated. No candidate deserves to be treated that way by the chair of the party. I don't care whether a person is going through the caucus convention, which I support dearly, or whether they're going through the signature path. What I care is, do they believe in our platform? And if they believe in our platform, I'm not so concerned about the path they take. I'm concerned about the goal. I'm concerned about what they will do when they're elected. Will they represent our party as they claim? The caucus system is the easiest way to find out if a person's going to represent the platform. It's much harder if they go the signature path. So when I was on the phone with Governor Romney, and I'm not going to take credit for this, but I said, Governor, will you do me a favor? I know you're going to go the signature path, because I know you support Count My Vote. Will you also go through the convention? Because if you go through the convention, what you're doing is you're telling the delegates, I still trust your opinion, and I still respect you, because you've been elected by hundreds of thousands of people throughout the state. And he said, yes, Phil, I have every intention of doing that. And he did. So I appreciate that he did that.
As I have watched the party over a couple of decades, we have this toxicity. This is my opinion, okay? I would have to do a questionnaire to validate it. But we have this toxicity, and we tend to bully people with acronyms like, well, that person is a rhino. If I'm a Republican and I'm accused of being a rhino, that puts me off. I don't feel comfortable in that kind of situation. I might agree 90%, but if I don't agree 100% with what that particular individual is saying, then I'm labeled a rhino and nobody will pay attention. What can you do, realizing that the State Central Committee also has a part of this, but what can you do as chairman to invite people, and although the Republican Party is large, the independent part of the state, who tends to be Republican for the most part, can be put off by that kind of an attitude. So what can you do to help remedy that kind of situation?
So I appreciate that. I think one of the things is, Chadwick made reference to the fact that, to Reagan's sort of famous comment, that someone who agrees with me 80% of the time is an ally and not a 20% traitor, right? And I think it's important that as a party, we can, you know, there's a thinker, a woman who's a great leader. She's no longer around, and few people of the rising generation have sort of heard her name. Her name is Chieko Okazaki, and she used a phrase once that has stuck with me. She said, in principles, great clarity, in practices, great charity. And I think it's important that we get really clear on what the principles are that we stand for. And that's what our platform is. That's the importance of those. Those are the core principles of what it means to be a conservative and to agree with the platform. But there are going to be differences. I saw this in the legislature all the time, is you'd have two equally conservative people who would agree on a particular principle, but then a bill would come in front of them and they'd vote opposite ways. And one person would say, look, I think this should be applied this way, or someone else would say, no, I think it should be this way. And I think part of the goal that we should have as a party is to have a spirit of openness, where we can have discussions over really important issues, but not make people feel like they aren't welcome. It's important that we're clear on our principles, but I think in terms of practices and how we implement those, I think it's important that we don't start, as was it Steve, right? Steve was saying that we don't sort of label people, because when we start labeling people, I just don't think it ever helps to label an individual. If we have a problem with the idea, let's focus on the idea. I'm happy to debate ideas all day long, but the minute we start addressing contempt to another human being, that's when we have a problem. And that's what we can't do as a party. And I think as Utahns, we know this, we fundamentally understand this, and we have a model, a way of working with others that I think should be a model for the country. It should be the way that we interact, should be something that we can export to other states and say, look, when we differ with each other, here's how we do it, and here's how we do it productively. And that tone, I think, makes all the difference.
So that's a good question, Steve. it's definitely part of the dynamic of how things have broken down and how they've stayed that way, with both sides digging in because of all the name calling and the labeling. And there's what I would say to that, I've answered this a little bit prior, but I'm going to get to that in a sec. So there's a thought leader named Skip Pritchard. He's got this concept of 9 principles of servant leadership. And I plan on executing all of those principles as state party chair. And the first one is a good servant leader will value diverse opinion, right? And that sounds all fancy and great and highfalutin, but it's like Derek was saying, it's a lot harder to do in application. But part of that is, if you're going to value diverse opinion, it's encouraging dissent, but making it safe to do so first, making clear ground rules of how that dissent and debate is going to be engaged in, and then of course the last part of that, which is the most important part, is there has to be compromise. Both sides have to give a little bit in order for everybody's opinion to be heard, everybody's input to get into the final product so that we can all agree on something. So as state party chair, I mentioned a little while ago, I can put together all the recommending bodies and committees I want, but having an advisory committee of different stakeholders, of different elements of the party to make sure that I'm always constantly in communication with that committee as a sounding board. As new issues arise, we can hopefully be proactive and nip those in the bud if there's issues, or suss that out for communication so we can debate that. And I definitely do think there needs to be some sort of set of ground rules for how we're going to be engaged in civility in the party for inter-party politics moving forward, and then have repercussions if somebody violates that. And again, that all comes down to having great organization and holding the leaders at every level of the hierarchy accountable. So if there's some delegate that's just being completely, just completely vitriolic and just nasty to everybody, or somebody that's on the other side, we need to find out who that person's precinct chair is and who the county chair is, and as the state party chair, we'll have a little meeting if we have to make sure that that sort of attitude or behavior doesn't infect the whole party. Because a little bit of leaven, right, leavens the whole bunch, right? So that kind of stuff has to be nipped in the bud right away. Thank you.
I kind of feel like I've already answered that question, and I know that came from you, and that's a great question because we hear about it all the time. Let me just say this. When I hear people talking about the disunity and the fracture of our party, I kind of laugh, bear with me, because if people really studied history, what's happened in the Republican Party is nothing compared to what happened when 55 men gathered in Independence Hall for 4 months and screamed and yelled and argued with each other. Anytime you have a deliberative body together, you're going to have divergence of opinion, and that's a good thing. I can't tell you how many times I've attended a state central committee meeting, and I had a certain idea in my head on how I was going to vote on something. But after listening to the body talk about it and getting more information, I realized, I kind of feel this way now. I no longer feel that way. That's what we do as Republicans. One of the things that we do bad that Democrats do great is we argue, and we call each other out. If a Republican on a national level does something wrong, every single one of the Republicans talk about what a horrible person he is and he needs to go. What do the Democrats do? They give that person an award. They rally around them and they champion them. See, the Democrats can do that because they're so disorganized and their ideas are so all over the place that everybody fits in that tent. Right? So we need to always encourage debate. I raised 7 kids with a beautiful wife of 37 years. None of us agreed on everything all the time. My wife and I don't agree all the time. But you know what? We love each other and we agree on the things that matter most. And that's what we need to do as Republicans. And stop the silly labels.